The courtroom went silent when the billionaire's wife finally spoke, but by then, it was already too late. Everyone thought Emily Carter was just another desperate housewife about to lose everything. Her husband Richard, tech industry golden boy, sat across from her with his mistress, smiling like he'd already won. The prenup was ironclad. The lawyers were ruthless. She didn't stand a chance, or so they thought. But when the judge opened that sealed envelope, his face went white. This wasn't a divorce hearing anymore. This was an execution. And Emily Carter? She was holding the axe. If you want to see how a discarded wife destroys an empire, stay until the end. Drop a like, comment your city below, and let's see how far this story travels. The Superior Court of Los Angeles smelled like old wood and expensive cologne. Outside, paparazzi pressed against the barriers, cameras ready to capture the fall of Emily Carter, the poor waitress who'd married a billionaire and was about to learn what happens when you reach above your station. Inside, the air conditioning hummed against the June heat, but the temperature in courtroom 7 felt arctic. Emily sat alone at the defendant's table, her hands folded over a canvas diaper bag that had seen better days. Her dress was navy blue, bought from a discount rack 3 years ago, slightly faded at the seams. No jewelry, no makeup artist's touch, just a woman who looked exactly like what Richard Hale's legal team had painted her to be, a nobody. Across the aisle, Richard Hale lounged in his chair like a king on a throne. 6'2", silver-threaded hair, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Beside him sat Lauren Price, all glossy blonde waves and predatory elegance, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She wore red, victory red, and she knew it. Richard's legal team took up half the courtroom. 7 attorneys, 3 paralegals, all dressed for war. At the head of that army sat Marcus Steele, the most ruthless divorce lawyer in California, a man who'd dismantled prenups, destroyed reputations, and walked away with everything his clients wanted. He'd never lost a case, not once. Emily's side of the room? Empty. No lawyer, no family, no witnesses. The gallery whispered like wind through dead leaves. She didn't even hire representation, someone murmured. Probably can't afford it. This is going to be a massacre. The twins stirred in the double stroller beside Emily's chair. Mason and Sophia, 18 months old, still drowsy from their morning nap. Emily reached down and adjusted Sophia's blanket with the kind of automatic tenderness that comes from sleepless nights and endless repetition. The little girl's fingers curled around her mother's thumb. Lauren leaned toward Richard and whispered something. He laughed, a low, satisfied sound that carried across the aisle. Emily didn't look up. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Margaret Chen entered, her black robe sweeping behind her like wings. She was 63, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a ruthless bun, and eyes that had seen every trick, every lie, every desperate play in 3 decades on the bench. She sat, and the room followed. Please be seated. Her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. We are here for the dissolution of marriage between Richard James Hale and Emily Ann Carter. Let the record show both parties are present. Marcus Steele rose immediately, all confidence and calculated aggression. Your Honor, if I may— You may not, Mr. Steele. Judge Chen didn't even look at him. I'll hear opening statements in the order I choose. Mrs. Carter, you're representing yourself? Emily stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Something about the acoustics in the room, or maybe just the weight of silence pressing down on everyone else. Judge Chen studied her for a long moment. You understand you're at a significant disadvantage without legal counsel. I understand, Your Honor. And you've declined court-appointed representation? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus Steele's smile widened. This was going to be easier than he'd thought. Very well. Judge Chen settled back in her chair. Mr. Steele, you may begin. Marcus rose like a gladiator entering the arena. He buttoned his jacket with theatrical precision and turned to face the courtroom, playing to the gallery as much as to the judge. Your Honor, this case is, at its heart, tragically simple. His voice was smooth, practiced, sympathetic. My client, Richard Hale, is a self-made man. Through vision, intelligence, and relentless hard work, he built Hale Technologies from a garage startup into a global force valued at $4.7 billion. He created thousands of jobs, He revolutionized cloud computing architecture. He achieved the American dream. He paused, letting that sink in. And then he made one mistake. He fell in love with the wrong woman. Emily's expression didn't change. She might have been carved from stone. Marcus continued, warming to his narrative. Emily Carter was a waitress at a downtown diner when they met. No college education, no family wealth, no prospects. My client saw past all that. He saw a young woman who seemed kind, who seemed genuine. He married her, provided for her, gave her a life she could never have imagined. He asked for nothing in return except loyalty. The word hung in the air like an accusation. But Mrs. Carter couldn't even give him that. Marcus turned now, facing Emily directly. Over the past 2 years, she has become increasingly unstable, paranoid, delusional. She makes wild accusations. She refuses medical treatment for what are clearly mental health issues. She creates chaos in my client's home and workplace. And now, tragically, she's using their children as pawns in a desperate attempt to extract money from a man whose only crime was loving her. He walked back to his table, lifting a document. The prenuptial agreement is clear and was signed willingly by both parties. Mrs. Carter is entitled to $100,000 in settlement, plus 12 months of spousal support. She receives no stake in Hale Technologies, no claim to any assets acquired during the marriage, and supervised visitation with the children pending psychiatric evaluation. Marcus turned back to the judge, his expression grave and concerned. Your Honor, my client doesn't want to destroy this woman. He wants to help her. But he also has a responsibility to protect his children and his company from someone who has proven herself to be dangerously unstable. We ask that the court uphold the prenuptial agreement in full and grant my client primary custody with Mrs. Carter receiving supervised visitation only after completing mandatory psychiatric treatment. He sat down. Richard squeezed his shoulder in approval. Lauren smiled. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Judge Chen's pen scratched across her notepad. Mrs. Carter, your opening statement. Emily stood again. She didn't move from behind her table. She didn't gesture or project or play to the room. She simply stood there, hands folded, and spoke in that same quiet, carrying voice. Your Honor, I have very little to say right now except this. Everything you've just heard is carefully constructed fiction. The truth is much simpler, and I have evidence to prove it. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit several documents for your review. She reached into the diaper bag. Not a briefcase, not a leather portfolio, but a canvas diaper bag with strained seams, and pulled out a manila envelope. Marcus Steele actually laughed. Your Honor, is this a joke? She's pulling legal documents out of a baby bag? Mr. Steele, Judge Chen's voice could have frozen fire. You will address the court, not the defendant, and you will keep your commentary to yourself. Marcus's smile died. Emily walked forward and handed the envelope to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Chen opened it, pulled out the contents, and began to read. The courtroom watched her face. At first she looked mildly curious, then focused, then very, very still. The silence stretched out like a wire pulled too tight. Judge Chen looked up at Emily. Mrs. Carter, when did you file these documents? 7 years ago, Your Honor, 3 months before my marriage to Mr. Hale. And these signatures have been verified? Yes, Your Honor. By 3 independent notaries and 2 law firms, all of whom are listed in the documentation. Richard frowned, leaning toward Marcus. What is she talking about? Marcus shook his head, confused. I have no idea. This is a stalling tactic. Judge Chen looked at Richard directly. Mr. Hale, you're aware that Hale Technologies is legally owned by the Voss Family Trust? Richard blinked. What? No, I own Hale Technologies. I founded it. You founded it, yes. But according to these documents, all shares, patents, and intellectual property were transferred to the Voss Family Trust upon the company's incorporation. You are listed as CEO and primary operator, but not as owner. The trust owns 100% of the company. The courtroom erupted. Richard shot to his feet. That's impossible. I would have known. I would have signed. You did sign, Mr. Hale. Judge Chen held up a document. This is your signature, dated 9 years ago, acknowledging the trust structure and your role as operator, not owner. Marcus grabbed the paper from Richard's hand. his face going white as he read. Emily spoke again, still calm, still quiet. "May I explain, Your Honor?" Judge Chen gestured. "Please do." Emily turned to face the courtroom, and for the first time something shifted in her posture. Not aggressive, not triumphant, just present. 9 years ago, Richard Hale was a talented programmer with big ideas and no funding. He approached 17 venture capital firms. All of them turned him down. He was about to give up when he received a phone call from a private investment group that had been watching his work. They offered him everything he needed: $40 million in startup capital, connections to industry leaders, legal protection, and complete operational control. All he had to do was agree to a trust structure that would protect the company from hostile takeovers and ensure long-term stability. She paused. Richard signed without reading the fine print. The company he calls his is owned by that trust. He's the CEO. He runs everything day to day, but he doesn't own a single share. Richard's face had gone from confusion to rage. Who the hell is the Voss Family Trust? Emily met his eyes for the first time since entering the courtroom. I am. The silence that followed was absolute. Lauren's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Marcus Steele looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Richard stared at the woman he'd married, the woman he'd dismissed as uneducated trailer trash, the woman he'd planned to destroy in this courtroom, and for the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what to say. Judge Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, are you telling this court that you are the sole beneficiary and controller of the Voss Family Trust?" "Not exactly, Your Honor." Emily's voice remained steady. "I am Elena Voss. The trust was established by my grandfather, Victor Voss, in 1947. It's been passed down through 3 generations. When my parents died, it came to me. I became its sole controller on my 21st birthday 8 years ago." She reached into the diaper bag again and pulled out another document. "This is my birth certificate. Elena Marie Voss, born in Geneva, Switzerland. I legally changed my name to Emily Ann Carter when I was 19 and moved to the United States. The change was filed through a sealed court order for privacy reasons. The seal can be lifted if Your Honor requests verification." Judge Chen took the document. She read it twice. Then she looked at Emily, at Elena, with something that might have been respect. "Why?" The question came from Richard. He was still standing, gripping the table edge so hard his knuckles had gone white. "Why would you do this? Why marry me? Why pretend to be someone else?" Elena's expression didn't change. "Because I wanted to know who you really were. When you came to the trust looking for funding, I read everything about you. Your work was brilliant, but I needed to know if you were someone I could trust with my family's legacy. So I met you as someone you'd never suspect. I worked at that diner specifically because I knew you went there every morning. I let you discover me. I let you fall in love with someone you thought was beneath you." She paused, and for the first time there was something sharp in her voice. "And you showed me exactly who you are." Richard's lawyer finally found his voice. "Your Honor, this is fraud. She lied about her identity. She trapped my client in a marriage under false pretenses." "Did she?" Judge Chen looked at Marcus over her reading glasses. "She used a legal name change. She disclosed no false information in the marriage license, and according to these documents, she actually funded the company your client claims to own. If anyone has grounds for fraud claims here, Mr. Steele, I don't think it's your client." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. Lauren was tugging at Richard's sleeve, whispering urgently. Richard shook her off, his eyes still locked on Elena. "The prenup," he said. "The prenup is still valid. You signed it." "I did." Elena nodded. "And according to that prenup, I'm entitled to $100,000 and 12 months of spousal support. No claim to Hale Technologies, no stake in any assets acquired during the marriage. It's all very clear." Richard's expression shifted from panic back to triumph. "Then you get nothing. You may own the trust, but I still get to walk away clean." "Not quite." Elena tilted her head slightly. "You see, there's a clause in your original agreement with the Voss Family Trust. Paragraph 17, subsection 4. Would you like me to read it, or would you prefer your lawyer do it?" Marcus was already flipping through the documents, his hands shaking. He found the page. "Read it." His face went gray. "No," he whispered. "Yes," Elena said simply. The loyalty clause. Any operator of a trust-funded company who remains married to a trust family member for 5 consecutive years receives a one-time performance bonus of 30% equity in the company, transferable to personal ownership. You would have been a billionaire in your own right, Richard. Not just in name, but in fact. She let that sink in. Our 5th anniversary was yesterday. The courtroom went very, very still. You filed for divorce 3 days ago, Elena continued, her voice never rising, never falling. You missed the clause by 72 hours. And according to paragraph 17, subsection 8, any operator who files for divorce within the 5-year window for reasons of infidelity or abandonment forfeits not only the equity bonus, but also their position as CEO, pending trust review. Richard's face had gone from red to white to something like ash. There's one more thing, Elena said. The prenup you're so confident about? It has a sunset clause. Any prenuptial agreement signed prior to the revelation of one party's complete financial status is voidable if that party can prove the omission was deliberate and material. I deliberately hid my identity and my wealth. The prenup is void, Richard. It always was. She reached into the diaper bag one last time and pulled out a thick folder. But I'm not here to take your money. I'm here to take my children, because while you were building my company, I was gathering evidence. She handed the folder to the bailiff. Judge Chen opened it. Her expression, already grave, turned to stone. What is this? Richard's voice cracked. Elena finally showed emotion. Not anger, not triumph, just bone-deep weariness. Security footage from our home, financial records showing you've been funneling company money into offshore accounts under Lauren's name, emails between you and Ms. Price planning how to divorce me, take the children, and destroy my reputation so I'd never fight back. Text messages where you discuss having me declared mentally incompetent so you could gain control of my assets. She took a breath. And recordings of you telling our children that mommy doesn't love them anymore, that mommy is going away and they'll never have to see her again. Mason started crying in the stroller as if he understood. Elena bent down and lifted him, settling him against her shoulder with the practiced ease of thousands of repetitions. He buried his face in her neck, his sobs muffled against her old dress. Richard looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at the exit. Your Honor, Marcus Steele said, his voice barely steady. We need time to review these allegations. You'll have plenty of time, Mr. Steele. Judge Chen's voice could have cut diamonds. In fact, I'm ordering an immediate forensic audit of Hale Technologies and all associated accounts. I'm also issuing a temporary restraining order preventing Mr. Hale from accessing any company systems, files, or funds pending the outcome of this investigation. She looked at Richard. Mr. Hale, you are to have no contact with Mrs. Carter or the children except through court-supervised visitation, which I am suspending entirely until the completion of the audit. You will surrender your passport to the bailiff within 24 hours. If these allegations prove accurate, you will face criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and custodial interference. This is insane, Richard shouted. You can't do this. I built that company. You operated that company, Judge Chen corrected coldly. You never owned it. And if Mrs. Carter's evidence is accurate, you've been stealing from it. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Hale and Miss Price from the courtroom. Wait. Lauren finally spoke, her polished composure cracking. I didn't know. I didn't do anything. Ms. Price, according to these financial records, there are 18 wire transfers totaling $4.2 million from Hale Technologies accounts to accounts in your name. You can explain that to investigators. 2 bailiffs moved toward the defendant's table. Richard backed away, his hands up. This is a setup. She planned this. She's been planning this for years. 7 years, Elena said quietly, still holding Mason. Since the day I met you. I wanted to believe you were better than this, Richard. I really did. I gave you chance after chance to prove me wrong. You proved me right instead. The bailiffs took Richard by the arms. He didn't resist, but he didn't stop talking. You crazy bitch! You manipulative Mr. Hale! Judge Chen's gavel cracked like thunder. One more word and you'll be held in contempt. Remove him. They led Richard out. He was still shouting, his voice echoing down the hallway. Lauren followed, her red dress suddenly looking too bright, too obvious. The crowd parted for them like water around stones. The courtroom stayed silent. Elena stood there holding Mason, Sophia starting to fuss in the stroller. She looked exactly like she had when she'd walked in, tired, worn, unremarkable. Except now, everyone saw what had been there all along. Judge Chen cleared her throat. Mrs. Carter, or should I say Ms. Voss? Emily is fine, Your Honor. It's who I've been for 5 years. I'd like to keep it. Emily, then. Judge Chen's expression softened, just slightly. I'm granting you emergency full custody of both children. I'm also issuing a protective order against Mr. Hale. The forensic audit will take approximately 6 weeks. We'll reconvene when it's complete, but based on what I've seen here today, I don't anticipate this taking much longer. Thank you, Your Honor. Elena gathered Sophia from the stroller, now holding both twins. They clung to her like she was the only solid thing in the world. Maybe she was. Ms. Voss? Judge Chen spoke again, and there was something different in her tone now. Curiosity, maybe, or respect. Why did you wait? If you had all this evidence, you could have stopped him years ago. Elena looked down at her children, then back at the judge. Because I wanted to be wrong. I wanted him to prove that the man I married was real, that the father of my children deserved them. I gave him every chance to be better. She shifted Mason's weight on her hip. He chose this. Every step of the way, he chose this. Judge Chen nodded slowly. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Elena walked down the center aisle, moving through the stunned crowd. Reporters started shouting questions. Camera flashes exploded like small bombs. But she didn't stop, didn't acknowledge them, just kept walking with her children held close. Outside, the June sun hit her like a wall of heat. The paparazzi surged forward, but courthouse security held them back. A black car waited at the curb, not a limousine, just a regular sedan. The driver, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, opened the back door. Home, Ms. Voss? Home, Sarah. Elena buckled the twins into their car seats, checked the straps twice, then slid in beside them. The door closed, muffling the chaos outside. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Elena looked back once. Through the tinted window, she could see Richard being led to a police car, his hands cuffed behind his back. Lauren stood on the courthouse steps, her phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted with panic. Elena turned away and looked at her children instead. Mason had stopped crying. Sophia was playing with her fingers, making small cooing sounds. They had no idea their world had just shifted on its axis. They just knew Mommy was here, holding them, keeping them safe. Emily. Elena. Elena, who had become Emily and might stay Emily forever, closed her eyes and let herself feel it. Not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet, bone-deep relief of finally, stopping the pretense. She'd spent 5 years being someone small, someone overlooked, someone easy to dismiss. She'd watched the man she'd hoped to love treat her like a possession, then like an obstacle, then like an enemy. She'd documented every cruelty, every theft, every moment he chose power over principle. And she'd waited. Not for revenge, for proof. Proof that she'd been right to doubt. Proof that her children needed protection. Proof that sometimes the only way to save what you love is to destroy what's trying to take it from you. The car merged onto the highway, leaving the courthouse and the chaos and the cameras behind. Sarah turned on quiet music, classical, something peaceful. The house is ready, ma'am, Sarah said. I had Marcus, the other Marcus, your estate manager, set up the nursery just how you like it. And I had Chef prepare something simple for dinner. I know you probably haven't eaten. Thank you, Sarah. Will you be making a statement to the press? Elena looked at her children, both of them starting to doze in the afternoon heat and the gentle motion of the car. No, she said quietly. Let the evidence speak for itself. Because that was the thing people like Richard never understood. They thought power was about who shouted loudest, who controlled the room, who made the biggest spectacle. But real power was quieter than that. Real power was knowing exactly what you owned, exactly what you were worth, and never needing to prove it to anyone. Real power was walking into a courtroom alone, with no lawyer and no army, and walking out with everything. The twins slept, the city blurred past the windows. And Emily Carter, Elena Voss, whoever she was now, finally let herself smile. Not a big smile. Not a triumphant grin. just a small, private curve of her lips that said what words couldn't: I won. Not because she'd destroyed Richard, though she had. Not because she'd exposed Lauren, though she had. But because she'd protected what mattered: her children, her truth, her power to choose. And that was worth more than any empire. The car turned onto a private road, winding up into the hills where the city couldn't follow. Ahead, gates opened automatically, recognizing the vehicle. Beyond them, a house waited. Not a mansion, not a showpiece, just a home. Safe, quiet, theirs. Sarah pulled into the circular drive and turned off the engine. "Welcome home, Ms. Voss." Elena looked at the house, then at her sleeping children. "Welcome home," she whispered to them. "Welcome home." And for the first time in 5 years, she meant it. The house in the hills had been in the Voss family for 40 years, purchased by Elena's grandfather during one of his rare visits to California. It sat on 12 acres of oak-covered slopes, invisible from the road, protected by security systems that cost more than most people's houses. Inside, it was nothing like Richard's glass and steel monument to excess. The floors were warm hardwood. The furniture was comfortable. The rooms smelled like lavender and old books. Elena carried the twins upstairs while Sarah brought in the diaper bag and the single suitcase that contained everything Emily Carter had been allowed to take from the house she'd shared with Richard. One suitcase. 5 years of marriage reduced to 30 pounds of children's clothes and a few personal items Richard had deemed worthless. He had no idea that the woman carrying that suitcase owned the house he lived in, the car he drove, the company he'd built his entire identity around. The nursery was exactly as Sarah had promised. 2 cribs with soft bedding, a rocking chair by the window, shelves lined with books and toys that had been in storage for months. Elena laid the twins down gently, one in each crib. They didn't wake. Sophia curled onto her side, thumb finding her mouth. Mason spread out like a starfish, his face peaceful. Elena stood there watching them breathe, feeling something in her chest finally unclench. "Ma'am?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, her voice barely a whisper. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Elena turned. "Who?" "James Chen. He says he's your attorney." Elena felt the exhaustion pulling at her. She wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and sleep for a week. But she'd known this was coming. She'd known the moment she handed those documents to Judge Chen that the next phase would begin immediately. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll meet him in the study." Sarah nodded and disappeared. Elena looked at her children one more time, then walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. The old navy dress, the tired eyes, the face of someone who'd been fighting a war in silence for so long she'd forgotten what peace looked like. She changed quickly, just jeans and a simple white blouse, nothing fancy, and washed her face. Her hands shook slightly as she dried them. Adrenaline crash, probably. The body's response to sustained crisis finally ending, or maybe just the beginning of understanding what she'd actually done. James Chen was waiting in the study, standing by the window that overlooked the valley. He was 42, sharp-featured, with the kind of quiet intensity that came from managing billion-dollar trusts for families that valued discretion above everything else. He'd been the Voss family attorney for 15 years. He'd known Elena since she was a teenager. He turned when she entered, and his expression was carefully neutral. "Elena." "James." She closed the door behind her. "I assume you watched the news." "I was in the courtroom." He gestured to one of the leather chairs. "Your grandfather would have been proud, or horrified, I'm not sure which." Elena sat, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she was. "Probably both." James sat across from her, crossing one leg over the other. "You didn't tell me what you were planning." "I couldn't risk it. If Richard's lawyers had gotten even a hint that I had representation, they would have dug deeper. They would have found the connection to the trust. They should have found it anyway. Any competent attorney would have run a background check on you." "They did." Elena almost smiled. "They found Emily Ann Carter, 19 years old when I changed my name, no criminal record, no assets, no family. The judge who sealed the records did it as a favor to my grandfather. He wanted me to have the option of a normal life." James made a soft sound of acknowledgement. "And you used that option to marry a man you were investigating." "I used it to find out the truth." "And now?" James opened the briefcase at his feet and pulled out a tablet. Now we have a situation that's about to get very complicated, very quickly. Richard's arrest is all over the news. Hale Technologies stock dropped 18% in the last 3 hours. The board is in emergency session, and the FBI just announced they're opening a formal investigation into corporate fraud and embezzlement. Elena closed her eyes. How bad? Worse than what you showed the judge. My team has been going through the forensic data you collected. Richard wasn't just skimming money, Elena. He was running a shell game. He created 17 subsidiary companies under Hale Technologies' umbrella, all of them controlled by Lauren Price or her associates. He's been funneling contracts to these companies, billing the trust for services never rendered, and pocketing the difference. How much? James looked at her steadily. Conservative estimate? $430 million over the past 3 years. The number hit her like a physical blow. That's almost 10% of the company's value. It's grand larceny on a scale that would make Bernie Madoff jealous. And it gets worse. Some of those shell companies were bidding on government contracts. If the FBI finds evidence that Richard used trust-owned resources to defraud federal projects, we're looking at potential RICO charges. Elena felt the headache starting behind her eyes. What do we need to do? Full cooperation with the investigation, complete transparency, and we need to remove Richard from every position of authority immediately. The board meets tomorrow morning. They'll vote to terminate him as CEO and install an interim replacement. Who? James looked at her. Just looked at her. No, Elena said immediately. Absolutely not. You're the controlling trustee. You have the authority and the responsibility. I have 2 babies upstairs who just watched their parents' marriage implode in a courtroom. I am not taking over a company right now. Then the company collapses. James's voice was gentle but firm. The board won't accept anyone else. They know the truth now, Elena. They know you've been the owner all along. If you don't step in, they'll assume the whole thing is unsalvageable. Stock will crash. Investors will flee. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. That's not fair. None of this is fair, but it's reality. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening valley. Lights were beginning to flicker on in the distance, the city waking up to its nighttime self. I didn't want this, she said quietly. I wanted to be wrong about him. I wanted to raise our children together. I wanted the fairy tale. I know. I gave up everything to find out if he was worth trusting. I worked as a waitress. I lived in a studio apartment. I let him think I was nothing so I could see who he really was. And every single day I hoped I was wrong. She pressed her palm against the cool glass. But I wasn't wrong. He showed me exactly who he was, over and over again, and I documented every moment because I knew this day would come. I knew eventually I'd have to choose between the fantasy and my children. You chose right. Did I? Elena turned to face him. I destroyed their father. I took away everything they knew as normal. How is that choosing right? James stood and walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He was too professional for that. But his presence was steady, grounding. You protected them from a man who was teaching them that cruelty is power, that manipulation is love, that their mother is worthless. What kind of life would they have had learning those lessons? Elena felt her throat tighten. A normal one. Normal isn't always good, Elena. You of all people know that. She did know it. She'd grown up in the Voss family, where normal meant private schools and diplomatic functions and the weight of inherited wealth pressing down on every choice. She'd watched her parents navigate that world with grace and strategy, teaching her that power was responsibility, that wealth was stewardship, that being born into privilege meant you owed the world something in return. And then they'd died in a plane crash over the Alps when she was 17, and she'd inherited everything. The trust, the houses, the investments scattered across 3 continents, the legacy her grandfather had built from nothing after fleeing Europe during the war. She'd been 19 when she'd legally changed her name and moved to America. Desperate to know if anyone would love Elena the person instead of Voss the fortune. Desperate to be seen as something other than a balance sheet with a heartbeat. Richard had seemed perfect, brilliant, ambitious, self-made. He talked about building something meaningful, about changing the world, about creating technology that would help people. She'd believed him. She'd loved him for it, and she'd funded his dream with $40 million of trust money, watching from behind her false identity to see if he'd build something worthy of the Voss name. For a while it had worked. The company had grown. Richard's innovations had been genuine, and he'd seemed happy with Emily, the waitress who laughed at his jokes and made him feel like the smartest person in every room. Then the twins had been born, and something had shifted. Emily had needed him to be present, to be a partner, to be a father. And Richard had resented it. The late nights, the crying babies. The wife who wasn't decorative anymore, who was tired and overwhelmed and needed help. That's when Lauren had appeared. Young, beautiful, ambitious. Everything Emily had been before children had complicated the picture. Elena had seen it happening, had documented the late dinners, the secret texts, the hotel receipts. And still, she'd waited, given him chances to choose better, to choose them. He'd chosen Lauren every time. Elena? James's voice pulled her back to the present. The board meets at 9 tomorrow morning. I need an answer. Elena looked at him, then passed him to the hallway where her children slept. Interim CEO, she said finally. 6 months maximum. I'll stabilize the company, cooperate with the investigation, and find someone qualified to run it long term. Then I step back. Agreed? Agreed. And James? I want Richard prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No plea deals, no reduced sentences. He tried to take my children. I want him to understand what that costs. Something flickered in James' expression. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. I'll make the calls. He left, and Elena was alone with the silence of the house. She made her way upstairs, checking on the twins, still sleeping, perfect and oblivious, then walked to her own bedroom and finally let herself collapse onto the bed. Her phone buzzed. Then again, and again. She ignored it for a long time, but eventually curiosity won. She picked it up and found 73 missed calls. Reporters, former friends, Richard's family, and one number she didn't recognize. That one had left a voicemail. Elena debated listening to it, then decided she might as well know what fresh disaster was coming. She pressed play. Mrs. Carter, or Ms. Voss, I suppose? The voice was female, professional, with a slight European accent. My name is Dr. Katerina Volkov. I'm a former colleague of your grandfather's, and I need to speak with you urgently about something that affects your family's safety. Please call me back at this number. It's important. The message ended. Elena stared at the phone. Her grandfather had been dead for 12 years. Most of his colleagues and friends were dead or retired, and she'd never heard the name Katerina Volkov in her life. She almost deleted it, almost wrote it off as another opportunist trying to exploit the chaos, but something in the woman's tone made her hesitate. Not desperate, not pleading, just matter-of-fact and urgent. Elena looked at the time. Almost 9. Too late to call back tonight. She'd deal with it tomorrow, after the board meeting, after she'd had some sleep and could think clearly. She set the phone down and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Her mind kept replaying the courtroom. Richard's face when he realized what was happening. Lauren's panic. The judge's cold precision. The moment when Emily Carter had peeled away like a mask and Elena Voss had stood in her place. She'd spent 5 years being small, invisible, forgettable. And today she'd stepped back into the identity she'd been born with, the power she'd inherited, the legacy she'd tried so hard to escape, and it fit like it had never left. That should have felt like victory. It felt like resignation. Somewhere around midnight, one of the twins started crying. Elena dragged herself out of bed and went to the nursery. Mason was standing in his crib, tears streaming down his face, reaching for her with both arms. Hey, baby. Hey, it's okay. Mama's here. She picked him up and he clung to her, his whole body shaking with sobs. No words yet. He was too young, but she understood anyway. He'd woken up in a strange place. Everything was different. Everything was scary. I know, she whispered, sitting in the rocking chair and holding him close. I know everything's changed. But you're safe. You and Sophie are safe. That's what matters. Mason's crying eventually quieted to hiccups, then to soft breathing. But Elena kept rocking, kept holding him, because if she put him down, she'd have to go back to her empty bed and her racing thoughts, and the enormity of what came next. The board meeting tomorrow, taking control of a company she'd owned in secret for 9 years, facing employees who'd thought Richard Hale was a self-made genius, explaining that their hero was actually a fraud and a thief, and somehow doing all of it while protecting 2 toddlers from the fallout. Sophia stirred in the other crib. Elena carefully stood, still holding Mason, and looked down at her daughter. The little girl's eyes opened, found her mother's face, and she smiled, that pure, uncomplicated smile that babies give when the person they love most is near. Elena felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, opening. "Okay," she whispered to her children. "Okay, we'll figure this out." She had no choice. Not really. The company would collapse without leadership. Richard had built his empire on her money and her name, and now that the truth was out, she had to own all of it. The success and the fraud, the triumph and the theft. But she could do it her way, with transparency, with integrity, with the values her grandfather had taught her before he died. Power is responsibility, Elena. Never forget that. The more you have, the more you owe to those who have less. She'd forgotten, for a while. Lost herself in the fantasy of being someone normal, someone unremarkable, someone who could love and be loved without the weight of the Voss name complicating everything. Richard had taught her that fantasy was dangerous, that people like him would always try to take advantage, that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Fine. She'd learned the lesson. Now she'd do what needed to be done. Elena put Mason back in his crib, checked that Sophia was settling back to sleep, and returned to her room. She pulled out her laptop, the one James had given her years ago, encrypted and secure, and started making a list. First, board meeting. Establish control. Remove Richard completely. Second, full audit. Find every dollar he'd stolen and trace where it went. Third, prosecution. Work with the FBI to build an airtight case. Fourth, stabilize the company. Reassure employees and investors. Fifth, find a permanent CEO who actually deserved the position. The list grew longer. Security for the children, custody arrangements, press strategy, damage control. By the time she finally closed the laptop, it was 3 a.m, and she had a comprehensive plan for the next 6 months of her life. It looked exhausting. It looked necessary. She set an alarm for 6 and forced herself to try to sleep. The alarm felt like it went off immediately. Elena dragged herself upright, feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. But the twins were stirring, and babies didn't care if you'd only slept 3 hours. They needed breakfast and clean diapers and someone to smile at them like the world was good and safe. So Elena smiled, fed them, changed them, played with blocks on the floor while Sarah made coffee strong enough to strip paint. At 8:30, James arrived with a car. Elena had dressed in a black suit, simple, professional, the kind of thing a CEO might wear to a hostile board meeting. She'd pulled her hair back in a twist, put on minimal makeup, looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Emily would have worn the navy dress. Elena wore armor. "Ready?" James asked. "No." She picked up her briefcase. "Let's go anyway." The drive to Hale Technologies headquarters took 40 minutes through morning traffic. The building was a monument to Richard's ego, 30 stories of glass and steel in downtown Los Angeles, with his name carved above the entrance in letters 3 feet tall. The lobby was already crowded with reporters when they arrived. Security held them back, but cameras flashed and voices shouted questions as Elena walked through. "Ms. Voss, is it true you've owned the company all along?" "Elena, did you know your husband was stealing?" "Ms. Voss, how much is Richard Hale accused of taking?" She kept walking, James at her side, security clearing a path. They made it to the private elevator without her having to say a word. The 30th floor was silent when they arrived. The boardroom stretched along the entire western wall, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The table was massive polished mahogany. 12 chairs, 11 of them occupied. The board members looked up when Elena entered. Some of them had been working with Richard for years. Some had known him since the company started. All of them looked at Elena like she was a stranger who'd just walked into a private funeral. Thomas Morrison, the chairman of the board, stood. He was 68, silver-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent 40 years building and selling companies. Ms. Voss, his voice was carefully neutral. Thank you for coming. Mr. Morrison. Elena took the empty chair at the head of the table. James sat beside her. I understand we have matters to discuss. Morrison sat back down, his expression grave. I think that's an understatement. This board has been operating for 9 years under the assumption that Richard Hale was the founder and owner of this company. Yesterday, we learned that was a lie. Today, we're dealing with federal investigators, plummeting stock prices, and a media circus. So yes, Ms. Voss, we have matters to discuss. Elena met his eyes steadily. Then let's discuss them. What do you need to know? A woman at the far end of the table spoke up. Diana Reeves, Chief Financial Officer, 45 and sharp as a scalpel. Did you know he was stealing? Not until 6 months ago. I suspected financial irregularities, which is why I initiated the private audit. The extent of the fraud didn't become clear until recently. And you didn't tell us. This from Marcus Webb, head of operations. You let us all keep working for a criminal? I needed proof. If I'd made accusations without evidence, Richard would have destroyed the evidence and discredited me. I had to wait until I had documentation that would stand up in court. By pretending to be his poor, uneducated wife, Diana's tone was acid. That must have been quite a performance. Elena felt the words land like a slap, but she didn't react. I changed my identity legally when I was 19. I wanted to know if Richard Hale was someone worthy of my family's investment. I met him as Emily Carter to get an unfiltered look at who he really was. And decided to marry him anyway? Thomas Morrison leaned back in his chair. Why? Because for a while he was exactly who he claimed to be. Brilliant, driven, visionary. The company's early success was legitimate. His innovations were real. I believed in what he was building. And when did that change? Elena took a breath. When our children were born and I needed him to be a partner instead of just a genius. That's when the mask started slipping. That's when I started paying closer attention. And that's when I started finding evidence of what he was really doing. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Thomas Morrison spoke. The FBI has requested full access to all company records. They're treating this as potential organized crime. If Richard's fraud extends to government contracts, we could all face criminal exposure for failure to supervise. Which is why we need to cooperate completely, Elena said. No stonewalling, no cover-ups, full transparency. We turn over every document they request, and we conduct our own independent audit to make sure we haven't missed anything. That could destroy the company, Marcus said. Richard already did that. We're just cleaning up the mess. Diana leaned forward. And who leads this cleanup? Because right now we have no CEO, our stock is in free fall, and our employees are terrified they're about to lose their jobs. We need leadership, and we need it now. All eyes turned to Elena. She'd known this moment was coming, had prepared for it, but actually saying the words felt like stepping off a cliff. I'll do it. Interim CEO for 6 months maximum. I'll stabilize operations, cooperate with investigators, and find a permanent replacement. After that, I step back to my role as trustee. Thomas Morrison studied her. Why should we trust you? You lied to all of us for years. I omitted information to protect an investigation. There's a difference. And unlike Richard, I actually own this company. I have every incentive to preserve its value and protect its employees. This isn't a game to me, Mr. Morrison. It's my family's legacy. Your grandfather was Victor Voss. This from an older man at the end of the table, someone Elena didn't recognize. I worked with him once, many years ago. He was a man of principle. Is that genetic? Elena met his eyes. I'd like to think so, but you'll have to judge for yourselves. The man nodded slowly, and something in the room's energy shifted. Thomas Morrison glanced around the table, reading the room. Then he turned back to Elena. The board will vote. All in favor of appointing Elena Voss as interim CEO for a period not to exceed 6 months? Hands rose. Not all of them, but enough. Motion carries. Ms. Voss, congratulations. You're now responsible for a company in crisis, a federal investigation, and the livelihoods of 8,000 employees. Try not to make things worse. Elena stood. Thank you for your confidence. I'll schedule daily briefings to keep everyone informed. And I'll be making a public statement this afternoon addressing our employees and stakeholders. Are there any immediate concerns I need to address right now? Questions came rapid fire after that. Technical details, legal strategies, communications plans. Elena answered what she could and delegated what she couldn't, feeling the machinery of corporate leadership clicking into place around her like a prison made of PowerPoint presentations and conference calls. By the time the meeting ended 2 hours later, she had a headache that felt like it might split her skull open. But she also had a plan, a team, and the authority to execute both. She made it back to the private elevator before her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Elena Voss. Ms. Voss, this is Special Agent Michael Torres with the FBI. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding the investigation into Richard Hale and Hale Technologies. How soon can you be available? Elena closed her eyes. Of course, because this day wasn't complicated enough already. I can meet this afternoon. 3 o'clock? That works. We'll send a car. The line went dead. James looked at her. You okay? Define okay? Fair point. They rode down in silence. When they reached the lobby, the crowd of reporters had tripled. Elena took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked through them with her head high. Tomorrow she'd hold a press conference. Tomorrow she'd start rebuilding what Richard had broken. Tomorrow she'd face whatever the FBI wanted to discuss. But today, right now, she needed to go home and hold her children and remember why she'd done any of this in the first place. Not for revenge, not for power. For them. Always for them. The FBI field office in Los Angeles was exactly what Elena expected. Institutional gray walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill, and the kind of furniture that prioritized durability over comfort. Special Agent Michael Torres met her in the lobby at exactly 3 o'clock, his handshake firm and professional, his expression giving away nothing. Ms. Voss, thank you for coming. This way, please. He led her through a maze of corridors to a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and stress. 2 other agents were already seated, a woman in her 40s with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a younger man who couldn't have been more than 30, fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. This is Special Agent Karen Rea, Torres gestured to the woman, and Agent David Park, our forensic accountant. We'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Elena sat, setting her briefcase on the table. James had wanted to come with her, but she'd insisted on coming alone. Whatever the FBI needed, she wanted them to understand she had nothing to hide. Agent Reyes opened a thick folder and slid a photograph across the table. Richard, leaving a hotel with Lauren, timestamp from 8 months ago. We've been investigating your husband for the past year, Ms. Voss. Initially for potential securities fraud, but the scope has expanded significantly. What I'm about to tell you is covered under an active investigation, which means you cannot discuss it with anyone except your attorney. Do you understand? I understand. Reyes pulled out another photograph. This one showed Richard meeting with a man Elena didn't recognize, both of them seated at an outdoor cafe. Do you know this man? Elena studied the photo. Middle-aged, expensive suit, dark hair graying at the temples. No, should I? His name is Viktor Sokolov. He's a Russian national with suspected ties to organized crime. He's also a major investor in several tech companies, including 3 of the shell corporations your husband created. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You're saying Richard was working with the Russian mob? Elena kept her voice steady, but her mind was racing. We're saying money from Mr. Sokolov ended up in accounts controlled by your husband and Ms. Price. We're trying to determine if it was a legitimate business relationship or something more concerning. Agent Park looked up from his laptop. The payments follow a pattern. Sokolov's companies would contract with Hale Technologies for software development. Hale Tech would bill the work at market rates, but then subcontract it to one of the shell companies at a fraction of the cost. The difference went into offshore accounts. Money laundering, Elena said flatly. That's our working theory, but it gets more complicated. Torres pulled out another document. Some of the software your husband developed for these contracts ended up being sold to other parties that we have significant national security concerns about. Elena felt her stomach drop. What kind of parties? The kind that the State Department would very much like to not have access to advanced American technology. The implications crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't just corporate fraud. This was espionage. This was treason. How deep does this go? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. That's what we're trying to determine. Reyes leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. Ms. Voss, we've done extensive background checks on you. We know about your family, about the trust, about the sealed name change. We know you've been operating as Emily Carter for 5 years. What we need to understand is what you knew and when you knew it. Elena met her eyes directly. I suspected financial irregularities 6 months ago. I hired private auditors to investigate. They found evidence of the shell companies and the embezzlement. I had no idea there was a foreign connection. I had no idea about any of this. But you knew enough to prepare for divorce. I knew my husband was stealing and cheating. I knew he was planning to take my children. I knew I needed evidence to protect them. That's all I knew. Agent Park turned his laptop around, showing Elena a spreadsheet that made her head spin. These are the transactions we've traced so far. $430 million moved through 17 different shell companies over 3 years. But there's another set of transactions we can't account for. Roughly $200 million in cryptocurrency transfers that originated from Heir Technologies servers, but went to wallets we can't identify. Elena stared at the numbers. You think Richard has hidden accounts we don't know about? We think your husband is smarter and more dangerous than anyone gave him credit for, Torres said. And we need your help finding out exactly what he's done. What do you need from me? Reyes pulled out a document and slid it across the table. Full cooperation. Access to every file, every server, every piece of hardware at Heir Technologies. We're also asking that you consent to monitoring your personal communications in case Richard tries to contact you. He can't. There's a restraining order. He's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. People do desperate things when they're facing that kind of time. Elena picked up the document and read through it carefully. It was a cooperation agreement granting the FBI essentially unlimited access to investigate the company. It also protected her from prosecution in exchange for complete transparency. She signed it without hesitation. When do you start? We already have, Park said. We've had agents embedded at Heir Technologies for 3 months. 2 of your software engineers, 1 facilities manager. They've been documenting everything. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Who else knows about this? Just us, and now you. Not even the board. We needed to make sure the investigation wasn't compromised. And Richard? Does he know? He knows he's been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. He doesn't know about the national security investigation yet. We're keeping that quiet until we understand the full scope. Torres stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Ms. Voss, I'm going to be blunt with you. Your husband didn't just steal money. He may have compromised classified technology. He may have aided foreign adversaries. If that's true, this case goes far beyond the FBI. We're talking CIA involvement, possible terrorism charges, potential threats to national security. And my children? Elena's voice was sharp. What happens to them if their father is convicted of treason? That's not our concern, Reyes said, not unkindly. But I can tell you that cooperating fully will help your case. The court will see that you took action to stop this the moment you understood what was happening. Elena stood, gathering her briefcase. You'll have everything you need, full access, full transparency. But I have conditions. Torres turned from the window. What conditions? My children's safety is non-negotiable. If there's any indication that Richard's associates might pose a threat to them, I need to know immediately. Second, I need regular updates on the investigation. I'm not going to be left in the dark while you dismantle my company. And third, when this goes public, because it will go public, I need advance warning so I can prepare. Reyes exchanged a glance with Torres. He nodded. Agreed. We'll assign protection to your residence. You'll receive weekly briefings. And we'll give you 48 hours notice before any major announcements. Then we have a deal. Elena left the FBI office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She'd thought she understood what Richard had done. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, infidelity. Those were comprehensible crimes committed by a man whose ego had outgrown his ethics. But this? This was something else entirely. This was betrayal on a scale that threatened not just her family, but potentially the country. The car James had arranged was waiting outside. Elena climbed in, and for the first time since the courtroom, she let the mask slip. She put her head in her hands and just breathed, trying to process everything she'd just learned. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won. You have no idea what's coming." L. Lauren. Even from jail, she was still trying to play games. Elena deleted the text and blocked the number. She didn't have time for Lauren's theatrics. Not when the entire foundation of her life was turning out to be built on lies and espionage. When she got back to the house, Sarah met her at the door with a concerned expression. "Ma'am, there's been a situation." Elena felt her chest tighten. "The twins?" "They're fine. They're upstairs with the nanny, but you have a visitor. She's been waiting for 3 hours. She says her name is Katerina Volkov and that it's urgent she speak with you." The name from the voicemail. Elena had completely forgotten about it in the chaos of the day. "Where is she?" "In the library. I offered her refreshment, but she declined everything except water." Elena walked through the house to the library, a room her grandfather had designed with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather chairs that smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco. A woman stood by the window, her back to the door, looking out at the valley. She turned when Elena entered. Katerina Volkov was in her 70s, Elena guessed, though she had the kind of timeless elegance that made age irrelevant. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob, intelligent gray eyes, wearing a simple black dress, and a string of pearls that were definitely real. She looked like she belonged in a European embassy, not a California library. "Miss Voss." Her accent was refined, vaguely Eastern European. "Thank you for seeing me. I know your day has been difficult." "How do you know that?" "I've been watching the news. Your husband's arrest is quite the scandal." Katerina's expression was sympathetic but not pitying. "Though I suspect you knew it would come to this." Elena closed the door behind her. "You said you knew my grandfather." "I did. Victor and I worked together for many years, first in Europe after the war, then later when he established himself in America. He was a remarkable man." "You're the first person I've met who knew him and didn't try to offer condolences from 12 years ago. Most people lead with sympathy." Katerina smiled slightly. "Most people didn't know Victor well enough to understand that he wouldn't want to be mourned. He would want to be remembered through action, through legacy, through you." She gestured to the chairs. "May we sit? What I need to tell you is complicated, and I'm not as young as I used to be." They sat across from each other, and Katerina folded her hands in her lap with practiced precision. "Your grandfather asked me to watch over you after he died. Not to interfere, but to observe, to make sure you were safe. I've done that for 12 years, Elena. I've watched you grow from a grief-stricken teenager into a woman of considerable strength and intelligence. I watched you change your name and disappear into anonymity. I watched you meet Richard Hale and make the choice to marry him." Elena felt her skin prickle. "You've been spying on me?" "Protecting you. There's a difference. Your grandfather had enemies, Elena, powerful people who would have loved to leverage his granddaughter for their own purposes. I made sure those people never got close to you. And now you're here because..." Katerina's expression grew serious. "Because Richard Hale is connected to people who were once your grandfather's enemies. The man he's been working with, Viktor Sokolov, that's not a coincidence. Sokolov's father was a KGB agent who tried to destroy your grandfather in the 1970s. He failed, but the grudge was passed down to his son." Elena felt ice spreading through her veins. "You're saying Richard's criminal activity was targeted specifically at me? At my family?" "I'm saying that when Richard approached the Voss Trust for funding 9 years ago, it set off alarms in certain circles, circles that have very long memories and very specific grievances. I believe Sokolov approached Richard after the company was established. I believe he manipulated your husband into betraying you and your family's interests. The FBI thinks Richard was selling technology to foreign adversaries." Katerina nodded gravely. "He was. And Sokolov was the middleman. But it wasn't just about money or technology. It was about destroying the Voss legacy from within. Your grandfather built something important, Elena, a network of legitimate businesses and investments that have funded humanitarian work, technological advancement, medical research. The trust isn't just wealth, it's infrastructure for good." She leaned forward. Sokolov wanted to corrupt that. He wanted to turn your family's resources into weapons against the very values your grandfather stood for, and he nearly succeeded by using Richard as his tool. Elena stood and walked to the window, her mind reeling. Why didn't you warn me? If you've been watching all this time, why didn't you tell me what Richard was before I married him? Because 9 years ago, Richard Hale was exactly who he claimed to be. A brilliant engineer with legitimate ambition. The corruption came later after Sokolov found him, and by then, you were already married with children on the way. I had to wait until I had proof before coming to you. And now you have proof? Katerina opened her purse and pulled out a flash drive. Everything. Communications between Richard and Sokolov. Financial records, meeting transcripts, names of everyone involved in the network. I've been compiling this for 2 years. Elena took the flash drive, weighing it in her palm. Such a small thing to contain such devastating information. Why give this to me? Why not go to the FBI yourself? Because this isn't just about Richard anymore. The FBI will prosecute him, yes. They'll dismantle his criminal enterprise. But they won't see the bigger picture. They won't understand that this is part of a longer war that's been going on for decades. Only you can finish what your grandfather started. I don't understand. Katerina stood, moving to stand beside Elena at the window. Your grandfather spent his life fighting against tyranny in all its forms. He built the trust not just as wealth, but as a weapon against oppression. He used his resources to support democracy movements, to fund independent journalism, to provide sanctuary for dissidents. That's the real legacy, Elena. That's what people like Sokolov want to destroy. She turned to face Elena directly. Richard's betrayal wasn't personal. It was strategic. And now that you've exposed him, you have a choice. You can treat this as a divorce, a fraud case, a sad story about a marriage gone wrong, or you can see it for what it really is, an attack on everything your family has built, and you can fight back. Elena looked at this flash drive in her hand. What exactly are you asking me to do? Take control of the trust completely, not just as a passive owner, but as an active leader. Use the resources your grandfather left you to continue his work. Expose Sokolov and everyone connected to him. Rebuild Hale Technologies into something that actually serves the values it was supposed to represent. I have 2 babies upstairs who need their mother. I can't just become some kind of crusader. Your grandfather raised you while running a global enterprise. Your mother balanced diplomacy with family. You can do both. But you have to choose to try. Elena closed her fist around the flash drive. If I do this, if I pursue this, Sokolov won't just accept defeat. He'll come after me, after my children. He'll try. That's why you need better security than what you have. That's why you need to be smarter and more ruthless than he expects. That's why you need people like me. People like you? Katerina smiled, and for the first time Elena saw something dangerous in that elegant face. I wasn't just your grandfather's friend, Elena. I was his partner in work that went far beyond business. I have resources, connections, skills that would be very useful to someone in your position. You're offering to help me. I'm offering to finish what Victor started. Through you. Elena turned back to the window, watching the sun set over the valley. Somewhere out there, Richard sat in a jail cell thinking he'd just gotten unlucky. Somewhere Lauren was probably plotting her next move. Somewhere Victor Sokolov was learning that his carefully constructed plan had just exploded in his face. And here in this library, a woman who'd spent 5 years pretending to be someone small and powerless was being asked to step into a role that terrified her. I need time to think, Elena said finally. Of course, but don't take too long. The moment the FBI learns about Sokolov's involvement, things will move very quickly. You want to be ahead of that curve, not behind it. Katerina moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The voicemail I left you mentioned your family's safety. I meant that. There are already people watching your house who shouldn't be there. I've taken the liberty of arranging additional security, former military contractors who specialize in this kind of protection. They'll arrive tomorrow morning. Please don't refuse them. How do you know there are people watching my house? Because I've been watching them watch you. Katerina's smile was thin. Welcome to the game, Elena. Your grandfather played it for 50 years. I hope you're half as good as he was. She left, and Elena stood alone in the library holding a flash drive, that might contain evidence of international conspiracy. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was James. "We need to talk. The FBI just contacted me. They want another meeting tomorrow, something about expanded scope of investigation." "I know. I just got some information that's going to make that meeting very interesting." "What kind of information?" Elena looked at the flash drive. "The kind that changes everything. Come to the house tomorrow morning, early, before the FBI meeting." She hung up and went upstairs to check on the twins. They were in the playroom with Maria, the nanny Sarah had hired that morning. Mason was building a tower of blocks while Sophia examined a stuffed elephant with intense concentration. When they saw their mother, both children scrambled toward her with delighted shrieks. Elena scooped them up, one on each hip, and buried her face in their hair. They smelled like baby shampoo and innocence. "Mama!" Mason patted her cheek with his pudgy hand. "Mama home," Sophia agreed, her vocabulary still limited but her meaning clear. "Yes, baby. Mama's home." She held them while they squirmed and babbled and tried not to think about the fact that their father had sold out his country and their family legacy for money and power. Tried not to think about the Russian operative who'd orchestrated it all. Tried not to think about the choice she was being asked to make, but the flash drive in her pocket felt heavy, like it was pulling her toward a destiny she'd never asked for. That night, after the twins were asleep, Elena sat in her grandfather's study, the one room in the house that had remained unchanged since his death. His desk was still covered with the same leather blotter. His fountain pen still sat in its holder. His chair still creaked in exactly the same place when you leaned back. She opened her laptop and inserted the flash drive. The files were meticulously organized: emails, financial transactions, photographs, audio recordings, a complete dossier on Viktor Sokolov and his network of associates. And right there in the middle of it all, proof that Richard had knowingly sold proprietary technology to shell companies controlled by foreign agents. But there was more. Elena clicked through the files and found something that made her blood run cold. Plans. Detailed plans for using Hale Technologies' cloud infrastructure to infiltrate American government systems. Backdoors built into software that had been sold to the Department of Defense. Access points to classified networks. Richard hadn't just stolen money. He'd created a weapon and handed it to America's enemies. Elena sat back in her grandfather's chair, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. If she turned this over to the FBI, they'd arrest everyone involved. The investigation would explode into a national security crisis. Hale Technologies would be dismantled. 8,000 employees would lose their jobs. The trust's reputation would be destroyed. But if she didn't turn it over, she'd be complicit in treason. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. She called Agent Torres. It was past midnight, but he answered on the second ring. "Ms. Voss, I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. I have new evidence that changes the scope of your investigation significantly. I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning." There was a pause. "How significant?" "National security significant. Bring everyone who needs to be in the room. This is going to be a long day." She hung up and looked at her grandfather's photograph on the desk. He stared back at her, his expression stern but kind, the face of a man who'd spent his life fighting battles most people never knew about. "I hope I'm doing this right," she whispered to the photograph. "I hope you'd be proud." The photograph didn't answer, but Elena felt something settle in her chest anyway, a kind of certainty, a sense of purpose. She'd spent 5 years hiding. 5 years being small and invisible and safe. That was over now. Elena Voss was done hiding, done pretending, done letting other people dictate who she was supposed to be. Richard had tried to destroy her. Sokolov had tried to use her. They'd both underestimated the woman they were dealing with. That was their mistake. And Elena was about to make sure they understood exactly how expensive that mistake would be. She picked up her phone and called Katerina Volkov. "I accept your offer. Send your security team. I want a full briefing on Sokolov's operation, and I need you to teach me everything my grandfather never got the chance to." Katerina's voice was warm with approval. "I was hoping you'd say that. We start tomorrow. Be ready, Elena. This is going to test every part of who you are." "Good," Elena said. "I'm tired of being tested by men who think I'm weak. Time to show them what strength actually looks like." She ended the call and sat in the darkness of her grandfather's study, feeling the weight of legacy and responsibility settling over her like armor. Tomorrow she'd hand everything over to the FBI. Tomorrow she'd watch Richard's entire criminal empire crumble. Tomorrow she'd step fully into the role she'd been born to play. But tonight, she was just a mother sitting in her dead grandfather's chair, holding a flash drive full of evidence that would change everything, wondering if she had the strength to do what needed to be done. The answer came quietly, from somewhere deep inside. Yes, she did. And more than that, she was finally ready to stop apologizing for it. The FBI arrived at 7 in the morning with enough personnel to fill Elena's dining room. Agent Torres led the group, but he'd brought reinforcements, 2 attorneys from the Justice Department, a cybersecurity specialist from the NSA, and someone who introduced himself simply as Robert from Langley, which Elena understood meant CIA. James sat beside her, his expression carefully neutral as he reviewed the non-disclosure agreements everyone had signed. Katerina had arrived an hour earlier with her security team, 4 men who looked like they could break someone in half without breaking a sweat. They'd swept the house for surveillance devices and found 3 tiny cameras hidden in air vents, planted sometime in the last week. Richard's work, probably. Or Sokolov's. Either way, they were gone now. Elena placed the flash drive on the table. Before we begin, I need to know something. What happens to Hale Technologies if everything on this drive is accurate? Robert from Langley spoke first, his voice measured and careful. That depends on the extent of the compromise. If classified systems were breached, we'll need to conduct a full security audit. That could take months. The company would be frozen during that period. And the employees? They'd be interviewed, cleared, and either retained or let go based on their level of involvement. He paused. Ms. Voss, we understand this is your company, but national security takes precedence over business concerns. I'm not asking you to prioritize business over security. I'm asking what happens to 8,000 people who had nothing to do with this. People who were doing their jobs while my husband was selling them out. Agent Reyes leaned forward. We'll do everything we can to minimize collateral damage, but we need to see what's on that drive before we can make any promises. Elena picked up this flash drive and handed it to Agent Park. Everything Katerina Volkov gave me is on there. Financial records linking Richard to Viktor Sokolov, communication showing they've been working together for at least 3 years, and evidence of backdoors built into software that's currently being used by the Department of Defense. The room went silent. Park plugged the drive into his laptop and started reviewing the files. His face went pale within the first 5 minutes. By 10 minutes, he was making notes so fast his hand cramped. At 15 minutes, he looked up at Robert from Langley. We need to make calls. Right now. Robert was already pulling out his phone. Excuse me? He left the room, and Elena could hear him speaking in rapid, clipped sentences. Agent Torres took over the laptop, scrolling through files with increasing urgency. The Justice Department attorneys exchanged glances that communicated volumes without a single word. Finally, Torres looked up at Elena. Where did you get this? From someone who's been tracking Sokolov's activities for years. Someone who knew my grandfather and understood what Richard was really doing. We need to speak with this person. Katerina stood from her position by the window. You're speaking with her now, Agent Torres. My name is Katerina Volkov. I worked with Viktor Voss for 35 years in various capacities, some of which are still classified. I've been monitoring Richard Hale since he became involved with Viktor Sokolov 3 years ago. Torres stood. Ma'am, with all due respect, who the hell are you? Katerina smiled slightly. Someone with clearances you can verify if you make the right phone calls. I suggest you call Director Phillips at the CIA. Tell him Nightingale is active again. He'll know what that means. Robert from Langley walked back into the room at that exact moment. His phone was still pressed to his ear, but his expression had changed from professional concern to something closer to shock. You're Nightingale? He lowered the phone. Director Phillips wants to speak with you. Now. Katerina took the phone and walked into the hallway, her voice dropping to a murmur that Elena couldn't make out. The agents in the room looked at each other with expressions that ranged from confusion to dawning comprehension. Someone want to explain what just happened? Elena asked. Agent Reyes actually laughed, though it sounded slightly hysterical. Nightingale was a CIA legend from the Cold War, an operative who worked in Eastern Europe during the 70s and 80s, responsible for extracting dozens of dissidents and scientists. Supposedly retired in the early 90s. If that woman is actually Nightingale, she's a living ghost. She's also been watching my house for 12 years without me knowing about it, Elena said dryly. So yes, I'd say she's qualified. Katerina returned and handed the phone back to Robert. Director Phillips has authorized my involvement in this investigation. He's also sending a team to take custody of the flash drive contents. They'll be here within the hour. Torres looked like he wanted to argue, but Robert shook his head. This is above our pay grade now. We cooperate, we share information, but CIA takes point on anything involving Sokolov. And Richard? Elena's voice cut through the professional posturing. What happens to him? He's already in federal custody on fraud charges, Torres said. We'll add espionage and treason to the indictment once we've verified the contents of these files. He's looking at life in prison without possibility of parole. Elena felt nothing at those words. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a hollow kind of acknowledgement that the man she'd married, the father of her children, had destroyed himself so thoroughly that there was nothing left to save. What about Lauren Price? She's being held as an accessory to fraud. If we can prove she knew about the espionage, she'll face similar charges. Agent Park was still scrolling through files, making notes, his expression growing increasingly grim. Ms. Voss, some of this software is currently deployed in active military systems. We need to shut it down immediately. Then shut it down. It's not that simple. If we pull it without replacement, we create gaps in security that could be exploited. We need to phase it out carefully while implementing clean alternatives. Robert stepped forward. That's going to require full cooperation from your technical team. We'll need access to source code, deployment histories, everything. Elena looked at James. He nodded slightly, giving her the legal all clear. You'll have it. James will coordinate with our IT department. Anything you need, you get. No delays. No bureaucracy. Torres cleared his throat. Ms. Voss, I need to ask you directly. Did you know about any of this before yesterday? Elena met his eyes steadily. I knew Richard was embezzling money. I knew he was having an affair. I knew he was trying to take my children. I had no idea about Sokolov or the espionage until Katerina contacted me yesterday evening. The moment I understood what I was looking at, I called you. And your grandfather? Did he have any connection to Sokolov or his father? Katerina answered before Elena could. Victor Voss fought against the Soviet regime for most of his adult life. Sokolov's father was KGB, assigned to destroy Victor's network in the 70s. He failed. The vendetta passed to his son, who clearly saw an opportunity when Richard Hale married Victor's granddaughter. So this was personal, Reyes said. Sokolov wasn't just using Richard for profit. He was using him to hurt the Voss family. Exactly, and he nearly succeeded. The CIA team arrived 40 minutes later, 3 serious-looking people in dark suits who took custody of the flash drive with the kind of care usually reserved for nuclear materials. They set up in Elena's study with their own encrypted laptops and started cross-referencing Katerina's files with their own intelligence. Elena excused herself and went upstairs to check on the twins. Maria had them in the playroom, both children happily destroying a tower of foam blocks. When they saw their mother, they abandoned the blocks and rushed over, Mason's little legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. "Mama! Mama, play!" Elena sat on the floor and pulled them both into her lap, breathing in the clean smell of them, the simple, uncomplicated love they offered. They had no idea their world was falling apart. No idea their father was a traitor. No idea that their mother was currently coordinating with federal agents to dismantle an international espionage network. They just knew Mama was here, and that made everything okay. Ms. Voss? Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation downstairs. Elena kissed both children on the head and carefully extracted herself from their grip. What kind of situation? Richard's mother is here. She's demanding to see you. Elena felt her jaw tighten. Patricia Hale. She should have known the woman would show up eventually. Where is she? In the foyer. Security won't let her pass the entrance. She's quite upset. Elena smoothed her shirt and headed downstairs. Patricia Hale stood in the marble entryway, flanked by two of Katerina's security personnel, who looked completely unmoved by her outrage. She was 65, perfectly coiffed, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her face was red with fury. "Elena, tell these thugs to let me through." "Mrs. Hale." Elena's voice was cool. "You're not welcome here." "How dare you? That's my son sitting in jail because of your lies." "Your son is sitting in jail because he committed fraud and espionage. I had nothing to do with his choices." Patricia's face contorted with rage. "You trapped him. You pretended to be someone you weren't. You manipulated him into marrying you so you could steal his company." "I owned the company before we married. Richard knew that. He signed documents acknowledging it. The only manipulation here was his, and it cost him everything. He loved you. He gave you everything, and you destroyed him because he made one mistake." Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. "Your son didn't make one mistake. He made thousands of them. He stole $400 million. He sold classified technology to foreign agents. He tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could take my children. He told Mason and Sophia that I didn't love them anymore. Those aren't mistakes, Patricia. Those are choices." Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained sharp. "You'll pay for this. I'll sue you for everything you have. I'll make sure those children never see their father again. I'll destroy you the way you destroyed him." "You can try." Elena's voice was flat. "But right now, you're trespassing on my property. You have 30 seconds to leave before I have you removed." "You heartless bitch." 20 seconds. Patricia looked like she wanted to say more, but one of the security guards stepped forward, and she seemed to finally understand that Elena wasn't bluffing. She spun on her heel and stalked toward the door, throwing one last venomous look over her shoulder. "This isn't over." "Yes," Elena said quietly. "It is." The door closed behind Patricia, and Elena stood there for a moment, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from her system. Sarah appeared with a glass of water. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine." "Thank you, Sarah." She wasn't fine. She was exhausted and overwhelmed and fighting the urge to either scream or cry, or both. But she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when so many people were depending on her to hold everything together. James found her 10 minutes later, sitting in the library with her head in her hands. "The CIA wants to hold a joint press conference tomorrow. They're going to announce the arrests and the national security investigation. They want you to be there." Elena looked up. "Why?" "Because you're the face of the company now. Because your cooperation is what made this possible. Because they want to show that you're on the right side of this." "I don't want to be the face of anything. I want to protect my children and rebuild what Richard destroyed." "Then that's what you tell them." "Elena, listen to me. This is going to get ugly. The media is going to tear into your personal life. They're going to question your judgment, your motives, everything. You need to control the narrative before they control it for you." Elena stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see news vans already gathering at the security gate. The vultures had arrived. "What do I say?" "The truth. You suspected fraud. You investigated. You found evidence of crimes far worse than you imagined, and you immediately turned everything over to authorities. You're cooperating fully. You're committed to making sure justice is served, and you're focused on protecting your employees and your children. That simple? That's simple. Don't elaborate. Don't speculate. Don't get emotional. Just facts." Elena nodded slowly. "All right. Tell them I'll do it. But I have conditions. I speak for 5 minutes maximum. I don't take questions about my marriage or my children, and I want security for the twins during the press conference. No exceptions." "Done." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. The CIA team finished their initial analysis of Katerina's files and confirmed everything she'd provided was accurate. Agent Torres filed additional charges against Richard: espionage, conspiracy to commit treason, violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Lauren Price was officially named as a co-conspirator. By evening, federal marshals had arrested 3 other Hale Technologies employees who'd been working with Richard. Elena watched their names appear on the news and felt sick. People she'd trusted, people who'd seemed loyal, all of them corrupted by Richard's promises of money and power. She put the twins to bed herself that night, reading them 3 stories and singing the lullaby her own mother used to sing to her. Mason fell asleep first, his thumb in his mouth, his other hand clutching his favorite stuffed dog. Sophia fought it longer, her eyes drooping and then flying open again, determined not to miss anything. "Sleep, baby girl," Elena whispered. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Sophia's eyes finally closed, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep. Elena sat there watching them for a long time, memorizing their faces, storing this moment of peace before the storm hit. Katerina found her there an hour later. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." "I know." Elena didn't move. "Katerina, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "My grandfather, when he was fighting his war, how did he balance it with family? How did he protect my mother while doing everything else?" Katerina sat in the other rocking chair, her expression thoughtful. "He compartmentalized. When he was with family, he was fully present. When he was working, he was ruthless. He never let the 2 worlds bleed together more than necessary." "And did it work? Your mother grew up safe, educated, and loved. She married a good man. She raised you to understand both privilege and responsibility. I'd say it worked quite well." Elena finally looked at Katerina. "Were you in love with him? With my grandfather?" Katerina smiled, a soft expression that made her look younger. "I loved him deeply. Whether that was romantic love or something else, I've never been entirely sure. We were partners in work that mattered. That was enough." "Do you regret not having children?" "I regret nothing. My life has been full and meaningful, and now I get to help his granddaughter finish what he started. That feels like legacy enough." Elena turned back to her sleeping children. "I'm afraid I'm going to fail them, that I'm going to be so focused on fixing this mess that I'll miss the important moments, first words, first steps, all the things that matter." Then don't miss them. Hire good people to handle what they can handle. Delegate ruthlessly. Be present when it counts. Katerina stood. "Your grandfather used to say that power is only meaningful if you use it to protect what you love. You have the power now, Elena. Use it well." She left, and Elena sat with her children in the quiet darkness, feeling the weight of everything settling over her like snow. The press conference was scheduled for 10 the next morning at the FBI field office. Elena woke at 5, showered, and dressed in a navy suit that was professional without being severe. She kept her makeup minimal, her jewelry simple. She wanted to look like someone competent and trustworthy, not someone performing for cameras. The twins were still sleeping when she checked on them. Katerina's security team had established a rotation. One guard would stay with the children at all times while Elena was gone. It should have felt excessive. Instead, it felt necessary. The FBI building was surrounded by media when she arrived. James stayed close to her side as they pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions. Inside, Agent Torres and Robert from Langley were waiting with a team of public relations specialists who'd prepared talking points and anticipated questions. "Remember," the lead PR person said, a woman named Michelle with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, "you're here to project strength and cooperation. You're not a victim. You're not defensive. You're a business leader who discovered criminal activity and took immediate action. That's the narrative." Elena nodded, reviewing her prepared statement one more time. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes of speaking, and then she could go home to her children. The press room was packed. Every major news outlet had sent reporters. Cameras lined the back wall like a firing squad. Elena walked to the podium flanked by Agent Torres and Robert, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking her every movement. She cleared her throat and began. "Good morning. My name is Elena Voss. Until recently, I was known as Emily Carter, wife of Richard Hale. I'm here today to address the situation at Hale Technologies and my role in the ongoing federal investigation." Her voice was steady, carrying across the room without needing amplification. 9 years ago, I provided funding to Richard Hale through the Voss Family Trust to establish Hale Technologies. I did so under the legal name Emily Carter, which I adopted for personal privacy reasons. Over the course of our marriage, I became aware of financial irregularities within the company. 6 months ago, I initiated a private audit. That audit uncovered evidence of massive fraud and embezzlement. She paused, making eye contact with the cameras. What I didn't know, what no one knew, was that the fraud extended far beyond corporate theft. Richard Hale was working with foreign agents to compromise classified systems and sell proprietary technology. The moment I understood the scope of what he'd done, I turned all evidence over to federal authorities. I am cooperating fully with the FBI, CIA, and Department of Justice to ensure that everyone involved is held accountable. Another pause. Hale Technologies will continue operating under new leadership. I have taken temporary control as CEO to stabilize the company and protect our 8,000 employees who had nothing to do with these crimes. We are working with federal investigators to identify and remove any compromised systems. We are committed to transparency, accountability, and rebuilding trust. She gripped the podium slightly. As for my personal situation, I will say only this. I married Richard Hale believing he was a man of integrity. He proved me wrong. I have 2 young children who deserve to grow up safe and loved. That is my priority. Everything else is secondary. She stepped back from the podium. Agent Torres will now take your questions. Thank you. The room erupted with shouted questions, but Elena was already turning away, James guiding her toward the exit. They made it to a conference room before her hands started shaking. You did well, James said. Very well. Elena sat down hard, pressing her palms against her thighs. How long before Richard sees that? He's being transferred to a federal facility today. He'll see it on the news like everyone else. Good. Elena stood. I want to go home. They left through a side entrance to avoid the media crush. The drive back to the house felt endless, but finally they pulled through the security gate and Elena could breathe again. Sarah met her at the door. The twins are in the garden with Maria. They've been asking for you. Elena went straight there, not even stopping to change clothes. Mason and Sophia were playing in a sandbox, both covered in sand and joy. When they saw her, they shrieked and came running, sandy hands reaching for her suit. She didn't care. She dropped to her knees and pulled them close, letting them cover her in sand and sticky kisses and unconditional love. Mama home, Sophia declared. Mama home, Elena agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Mama's always coming home. That evening, after the twins were bathed and fed and finally sleeping, Elena's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Voss? The voice was male, accented, controlled. My name is Viktor Sokolov. I believe we should talk. Elena's blood ran cold. She gestured frantically at Katerina, who was across the room. Katerina's expression went sharp and focused. She pulled out her own phone and started typing rapidly. I have nothing to say to you, Elena said. Oh, I think you do. You've cost me a great deal of money and caused significant complications. I admire your courage, but courage without wisdom is just foolishness. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You're playing a game you don't understand, Ms. Voss. Your grandfather knew the rules. You don't. Katerina showed Elena her phone screen. Keep him talking, tracing the call. Then explain the rules to me, Elena said, forcing her voice to stay calm. Sokolov laughed, a sound without warmth. The rules are simple. You have something I want. I have resources you can't imagine. We can either negotiate like civilized people, or I can make your life very difficult. You already made my life difficult. You manipulated my husband into committing treason. Your husband was weak and greedy. I simply provided opportunities. He made his own choices. And now he's going to prison for them. Yes, which is unfortunate but ultimately irrelevant. He was always expendable. You, however, are not. You're Victor Voss's granddaughter. You control resources I could find very useful. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. I will never work with you. Never is a long time, Ms. Voss. You have children, lovely children. It would be a shame if anything happened to disrupt their peaceful life. The threat was clear. Elena felt rage surge through her, hot and primal. If you come near my children, I will destroy you. Brave words, but you're one woman with 2 babies. I have an organization with reach across continents. Think carefully about your next moves. The line went dead. Katerina was already on her phone, speaking rapid Russian to someone. She hung up and turned to Elena. The call was routed through 6 different countries. We couldn't trace it. But he made a mistake by calling it all. It means he's worried. It means we're hurting him. He threatened my children. Yes. Which means we need to move them somewhere safer. I have a facility in Montana, completely off-grid, secured by people I trust with my life. The twins and Maria can stay there until this is resolved. I'm not sending my children away. Elena, Katerina's voice was gentle but firm. Sokolov just told you he knows where they are. He threatened them directly. You cannot protect them here, no matter how good our security is. Let me get them somewhere he can't reach. Elena felt tears pressing behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. For how long? Until we've eliminated the threat. Days, maybe weeks. But they'll be safe, and you'll be free to fight without constantly worrying about their safety. Elena walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden. Somewhere out there, Sokolov was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably hearing about the press conference, finally understanding that his carefully constructed lies had all come crashing down. And here in this house, two babies slept peacefully, having no idea that their mother was about to send them away to protect them from monsters they'd never see. Tomorrow, Elena said quietly, make the arrangements. But I go with them. I get them settled. I explain in a way they can understand. Agreed. Elena turned back to Katerina. And then we take Sokolov apart, piece by piece. I want him to regret every threatening my family. Katerina's smile was sharp and approving. Now you sound like your grandfather. He'd be very proud. But Elena didn't feel proud. She felt angry and scared and determined in equal measure. She felt like a woman who'd been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. Tomorrow her children would leave for Montana. Tomorrow she'd become someone her enemies should have feared from the beginning. Tomorrow, the real war would start. The private plane left at dawn. Elena sat in the cabin holding both twins, watching the California coastline disappear beneath them as they headed east toward Montana. Mason had his face pressed against the window, fascinated by the clouds. Sophia had fallen asleep in Elena's lap, her thumb in her mouth, completely trusting. Maria sat across from them, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. She'd worked for the Voss family for 6 years, first as Elena's mother's assistant and now as the twins' nanny. She understood what was happening, even if she didn't know all the details. How long do you think we'll be there? Maria asked quietly. I don't know. Weeks, maybe. However long it takes to make sure you're all safe. And you? Elena looked down at Sophia's sleeping face. I have work to do. Work I can't do if I'm worried about them every second. The facility in Montana was exactly what Katerina had described. A compound buried in the mountains, accessible only by a single road that could be easily monitored and defended. The main house was modest but comfortable, with a nursery already set up and a kitchen stocked with everything Maria might need. 4 of Katerina's security personnel lived on site. Elena met them all, looking each one in the eye, making it clear that if anything happened to her children, there would be nowhere in the world they could hide from her. They understood. Elena spent 2 days with the twins, establishing routines, making sure they felt safe and settled. She read them stories and played in the snow and held them while they slept. And when it was finally time to leave, she knelt down and pulled them close. Mama has to go away for a little while, she said, keeping her voice steady. But Maria is here, and you're going to have so much fun playing in the snow and being safe. Mama come back? Mason's lower lip trembled. Always, baby. Mama always comes back. I promise. She kissed them both, breathed in their scent one more time, and walked away before they could see her cry. The sound of their confused crying followed her to the car, and it took everything she had not to turn around and gather them back into her arms. But this was necessary. Sokolov had made a threat, and Elena couldn't afford to be distracted by fear for their safety. They were safer here than anywhere else in the world. She had to believe that. The flight back to Los Angeles felt longer than the flight out. Elena spent it reviewing files on her laptop, memorizing everything Katerina had compiled on Sokolov's network. Names, addresses, financial connections, weaknesses. By the time the plane landed, she had a plan. James was waiting at the airfield with news. Richard's pleading not guilty to all charges. His new lawyer held a press conference this morning claiming you framed him, that you planted evidence, that this is all revenge for the affair. Elena felt nothing at the words. Does anyone believe him? His mother, probably. Lauren Price is singing like a canary to get a plea deal. She's confirmed everything, the embezzlement, the shell companies, Richard's meetings with Sokolov. The prosecution's case is airtight. Good. What about Hale Technologies? Stock stabilized after your press conference. The board approved your emergency restructuring plan. We're replacing all compromised software systems, and the CIA cleared us to announce that we're cooperating fully with the investigation. Elena climbed into the waiting car. Set up a meeting with the board for tomorrow. I want to discuss permanent CEO candidates. I meant what I said about stepping back after 6 months. Elena, you've been interim CEO for 4 days. Maybe focus on surviving the week before planning your exit. I'm not planning an exit. I'm planning a transition. There's a difference. James studied her. You've changed. Since the courtroom. Since you stopped pretending to be Emily. I stopped apologizing for who I am. That's not change. That's clarity. They drove to the house in silence. Katerina was waiting in the study with Robert from Langley and 2 other people Elena didn't recognize. Robert stood when she entered. Ms. Voss, thank you for making time. This is Director Sarah Chen from the NSA and Assistant Director Marcus Webb from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. We need to discuss Viktor Sokolov. Elena sat, folding her hands on the desk. What about him? Director Chen spoke first, her voice crisp and efficient. Sokolov's organization is larger than we initially understood. He's connected to intelligence services in 3 countries, multiple criminal enterprises, and at least a dozen shell corporations that we know of. Taking him down requires coordination across multiple agencies and international partners. How long will that take? Months? Maybe years? I don't have years. He threatened my children. I need him neutralized now. We understand your concern, Marcus Webb said carefully. But this is a complex investigation. We need to build cases against everyone in his network, not just Sokolov himself. Elena leaned forward. Then let me help speed things up. I have resources you don't have. Connections my grandfather built over decades. People who owe the Voss family favors. Use them. Robert exchanged glances with the others. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we stop treating this like a normal criminal investigation and start treating it like what it is. A war. Sokolov is a threat to national security. He's compromised classified systems, funded terrorism, and corrupted American businesses. You need to take him off the board permanently, and I can help you do it. Katerina smiled slightly from her position by the window. Director Chen looked intrigued. What kind of help are we talking about? Chen asked. Elena opened her laptop and pulled up a file. Sokolov's money flows through 12 primary accounts in 5 countries. I can freeze 10 of them within 24 hours through banking connections my family maintains. That cuts off his operational funding immediately. She clicked to another screen. His communication network relies on encrypted servers in Estonia. I know someone who can take those offline without leaving a trace. That blinds him. Another click. And his protection comes from corrupt officials in 3 governments. I have enough dirt on those officials to force their cooperation or ensure their removal. That isolates him. The room was completely silent. Finally, Marcus Webb spoke. Ms. Voss, what you're describing sounds like a coordinated intelligence operation. We can't officially sanction, then don't officially sanction it. Give me tacit approval and plausible deniability. I act through private channels. You pursue your investigation through official ones. We coordinate without being connected. And within a month, Sokolov is either in custody or completely neutered. Director Chen leaned back in her chair. This is highly irregular. So is selling classified technology to foreign adversaries. So is threatening American citizens. I'm offering you a solution that doesn't require congressional approval or international treaties, just results. Robert looked at Katerina. This is what you trained her for. I trained her to finish what her grandfather started. This is exactly that. The federal agents exchanged looks that communicated entire conversations. Finally, Director Chen nodded slowly. We would need regular updates, complete transparency about your activities, and if anything goes wrong, you're on your own. Understood. And Ms. Voss, if you're going to do this, do it right. Half measures will only make Sokolov more dangerous. Elena's smile was cold. I don't do half measures. The meeting ended with handshakes and encrypted communication protocols. When the federal agents left, Katerina poured 2 glasses of vodka and handed one to Elena. Your grandfather would be impressed and possibly horrified. I'm not sure which. Both, probably. Elena took a sip, feeling the burn. How quickly can you activate the old networks? 12 hours for initial contact, 48 hours for coordinated action. What's your priority target? His money. Cut off his funding, and everything else becomes easier. Katerina pulled out her phone and started making calls. Elena listened to her speak in rapid Russian, French, and what sounded like Polish, activating contacts across 3 continents. By midnight, they had commitments from banking officials in Switzerland, lawyers in the Cayman Islands, and someone Katerina referred to only as the accountant in Singapore. By morning, 4 of Sokolov's accounts were frozen pending fraud investigations. By noon, 2 more were seized by European authorities. The remaining accounts started moving money frantically, trying to hide assets before they could be touched. But Elena was faster. She'd spent the night working with a team of forensic accountants, tracing every transfer, identifying every shell company, mapping Sokolov's entire financial network. By the time he realized what was happening, she'd cut off 70% of his liquid assets. The response came quickly. Another phone call, this one to James's office number. Ms. Voss. Sokolov's voice was tight with controlled rage. You're making a terrible mistake. James had the call on speaker. Elena, Katerina, and Agent Torres were all listening. The only mistake was yours. You threatened my children. That was unwise. I could still make good on that threat. You could try, but you're running out of money to pay the people who'd carry it out. How long before your organization starts falling apart, Victor? How long before people realize you can't protect them anymore? Silence. Then, you're playing with forces you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a parasite who's been feeding off systems you didn't build and can't control. My grandfather fought people like you his entire life. He taught me well. Your grandfather is dead, but his legacy isn't, and I'm going to use every resource he left me to destroy you, not because you hurt me, because you threatened what I love. That was your mistake. She hung up. Agent Torres looked impressed. That was either very brave or very stupid. It was strategic. Now he knows we're not backing down. He'll make mistakes out of anger. People always do. The mistakes came within 48 hours. Sokolov tried to move assets through a bank in Prague that Elena had already contacted. The transfer was flagged and reported to Interpol. He tried to access one of his Estonian servers and found it completely wiped. He reached out to 3 of his corrupt officials for help and found that all 3 had suddenly resigned their positions amid scandal. Elena watched it all unfold with cold satisfaction. This was what power looked like when you stopped apologizing for having it. This was what happened when you combined resources with resolve. By the end of the first week, Sokolov's network was in shambles. By the end of the second week, 3 of his top lieutenants had been arrested in coordinated raids across Europe. By the end of the third week, his encrypted communication network was completely compromised. And then came the breakthrough. Agent Park called Elena at 6 in the morning. We found him, Sokolov. He's in a villa outside Prague. Czech authorities are preparing to raid it now. Elena was already getting dressed. I want to be there when he's arrested. That's not a good idea. I don't care if it's a good idea. That man threatened my children. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes he's lost. There was a pause, then, there's a military transport leaving from LAX in 3 hours. Be on it. Elena made it with 20 minutes to spare. The flight to Prague took 11 hours. She spent it reviewing everything they knew about Sokolov, memorizing his face, his history, his crimes. By the time they landed, she could have written his biography. The villa sat on a hillside overlooking the city. Czech police had it surrounded, but they were waiting for darkness before moving in. Elena watched from a command post half a mile away, listening to radio chatter in Czech and English, feeling anticipation coil in her stomach. At 8 o'clock, the raid began. Flashbangs, shouted commands, the controlled chaos of a tactical assault. It took 6 minutes from breach to all clear. They'd captured 5 people, including Viktor Sokolov. Elena saw him as they led him out in handcuffs. He was smaller than she'd expected, almost ordinary looking, mid-50s, graying hair, expensive casual clothes. He could have been anyone's uncle, until you looked at his eyes, cold, calculating, empty of anything resembling humanity. Agent Torres appeared beside her. Want to talk to him? Yes. They brought Sokolov to an interrogation room in the local police station. He sat across from Elena with his hands cuffed to the table, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Sokolov smiled. You're younger than I expected. More beautiful, too. I can see why Richard fell for you. Don't talk about my husband. Ex-husband, I believe. How is prison treating him? Elena leaned forward. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell. Multiple countries want to prosecute you. You'll never see freedom again. Was it worth it? All of this? Just to hurt my family? Sokolov's smile didn't waver. Your grandfather cost my father everything. His career, his reputation, his life. This was never about money, Ms. Voss. This was about legacy. About settling debts. And you failed. My grandfather's legacy is stronger than ever. Your father's legacy is a son in handcuffs facing life in prison. Who won? Something flickered in Sokolov's eyes. Not quite rage, but close. You think you've won? You think destroying my organization matters? There are others. There will always be others. Your grandfather fought this war for 50 years and never truly won. You won't either. Elena stood. Maybe not, but I'll die trying. That's more than you can say. She walked out without looking back. Agent Torres was waiting in the hallway. Feel better? Not really, but it needed to be done. They flew back to Los Angeles the next day. Elena spent the flight sleeping for the first time in weeks, finally allowing herself to believe that the immediate threat was over. When she landed, James was waiting with updates. Richard's trial date had been set for 4 months from now. Lauren had accepted a plea deal and would testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. Patricia Hale had dropped her threatened lawsuit after her lawyers explained she had no case. And Hale Technologies was recovering. Stock prices were climbing back toward pre-scandal levels. The board had approved Elena's restructuring plan. Employees were cautiously optimistic about the future. They want to know when you're selecting a permanent CEO, James said. Elena looked out the car window at the city passing by. Soon. I have someone in mind. I just need to make sure they're ready. Who? You'll see. The house felt empty without the twins. Elena walked through rooms that were too quiet, too clean, too devoid of the beautiful chaos that children brought. She missed them with an ache that was physical. But they were safe. Katerina had sent updates every day, photos of Mason building snowmen, videos of Sophia laughing at the dogs that roamed the compound, reports of both children thriving despite their mother's absence. 3 more weeks, Katerina had said. 3 more weeks to make sure every threat of Sokolov's organization was cut, every threat neutralized, every danger eliminated. Elena could survive 3 more weeks. She spent that time transforming Hale Technologies into something worthy of the Voss name. She implemented new security protocols, hired independent auditors, established an ethics oversight board. She met with every department, listening to concerns, addressing problems, showing employees that she was committed to building something better than what Richard had created. And she searched for a CEO who understood that business was about more than profit, someone who saw technology as a tool for improving lives, not just extracting value, someone who would honor the second chance she was giving the company. She found that person in an unexpected place. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been Hale Technologies' chief ethics officer for 5 years, a position Richard had created as window dressing and then ignored completely. She was 43, brilliant, and had a reputation for being impossible to intimidate. She'd been quietly documenting Richard's ethical violations for years, building a case she'd planned to take to the board before Elena had beaten her to it. Elena called her into the office on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Ms. Voss. Sarah sat, her expression professionally neutral. I assume this is about the ethics review I submitted last week. Actually, it's about a different position. I'm looking for a permanent CEO for Hale Technologies. Someone who understands that we need to completely rebuild the company's culture and values. Someone who has the courage to make hard decisions. Someone who can't be corrupted or intimidated. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. You're offering me the position? I'm asking if you'd be interested. You'd have full authority to make whatever changes you think are necessary. The board has agreed to give the new CEO significant autonomy, and you'd have the full backing of the Voss Trust. Ms. Voss, I'm not a business person. I'm an ethicist, which is exactly what this company needs. We have plenty of business people. What we need is someone who understands that how we make money matters as much as how much we make. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I'd want to bring in my own senior team, people I trust. Done. And I'd want a commitment that the trust will prioritize social good over maximum profit. That's always been the trust's mission. Richard perverted it. You'd be restoring it. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. My husband is going to think I've lost my mind. Is that a yes? Sarah turned back, and for the first time she smiled. That's a yes. They shook hands, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. The company would be fine. It would be better than fine. It would be what it should have been all along. 2 weeks later, the board officially voted Sarah Mitchell in as CEO of Hale Technologies. Elena gave a short speech, handed over the reins, and stepped back into her role as trustee with relief so profound she almost cried. That night, Katerina called. It's time. Bring them home. Elena was on a plane to Montana within 2 hours. The twins didn't recognize her at first. They'd been gone for 6 weeks, an eternity in toddler time. But then Mason's face lit up with recognition, and he came running, Sophia right behind him, both of them shrieking, Mama! 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 Elena dropped to her knees and caught them, holding them so tight they squirmed and giggled. She buried her face in their hair and cried, not caring who saw. I missed you so much, so much. Mama home now? Sophia asked. Yes, baby, Mama's home, and we're all going home together. The flight back to Los Angeles felt like the first real breath she'd taken in weeks. The twins chattered about snow and dogs and all their adventures, while Elena just held them close and let their voices wash over her. When they arrived at the house, Sarah was waiting with takeout and a bottle of wine. Welcome home, she said simply. Thank you for everything. They ate dinner on the floor of the playroom while the twins destroyed a new set of blocks. Sarah updated Elena on the company. Morale was improving, the ethics review was nearly complete, and 3 major clients had renewed their contracts after learning about the leadership change. You made the right choice stepping back, Sarah said. The company needed someone who could give it full attention. You needed to be a mother. I can be both. You can, but you don't have to be both all the time. That's the lesson, I think. After Sarah left, Elena gave the twins a bath, read them 3 stories, and sang them to sleep. Then she walked downstairs to her grandfather's study and sat in his chair one more time. Richard's trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. She'd been subpoenaed to testify. The thought of facing him across a courtroom filled her with nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no residual pain, just a kind of distant acknowledgement that it needed to happen. But that was a problem for future Elena, present. Elena was just a woman who'd fought a war and survived, who'd protected her children and rebuilt her family's legacy, who'd stopped apologizing for being powerful and started using that power for something meaningful. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your victory. Your grandfather would be proud. K. Elena smiled and deleted the text. Katerina was right. Her grandfather would be proud, not because she'd won, but because she'd fought for the right reasons. The next morning, she woke to Mason standing beside her bed, his face inches from hers. Mama, breakfast? Elena laughed and pulled him into bed beside her, tickling him until he shrieked with laughter. Sophia appeared moments later, climbing up and demanding equal attention. They made pancakes together, the twins helping in ways that created more mess than progress. They played in the garden. They read books. They lived a completely normal, boring, beautiful day. And that night, after the twins were asleep, Elena sat on the back patio with a glass of wine and looked up at the stars. She thought about Richard, sitting in a cell awaiting trial. She thought about Lauren, who'd betrayed everything for money and status and ended up with neither. She thought about Sokolov, who'd spent his life nursing a grudge and accomplished nothing except his own destruction. And she thought about herself, the girl who'd changed her name to find out if she could be loved for who she was rather than what she owned. The woman who'd discovered that love without integrity was worthless. The mother who'd learned that protecting her children meant sometimes becoming someone they wouldn't understand until they were older. She'd lost a marriage, but she'd gained clarity. She'd lost her anonymity, but she'd gained purpose. She'd lost the fantasy of a normal life, but she'd gained something better, a meaningful one. 3 weeks later, Elena sat in a courtroom for the second time. But this time she wasn't defending herself. She was testifying against Richard, calmly recounting his crimes, providing evidence of his betrayals. He watched her the entire time, his expression unreadable. When she finished and stepped down from the witness stand, he tried to speak to her. Elena, please, can we talk? She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the man she'd once loved underneath the criminal he'd become, saw the father of her children wearing prison orange and handcuffs. No, Richard, we can't. She walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Richard Hale was found guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, espionage, conspiracy, computer crimes. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Elena wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She was at home playing with her children in the garden, teaching them how to plant tomatoes. Sarah called with the news. It's over. He's going away for the rest of his life. Thank you for letting me know. How do you feel? Elena looked at her children, their hands covered in dirt, their faces lit with concentration as they gently patted soil around tiny seedlings. I feel free. She hung up and went back to her children, to the important work of teaching them about growth and patience and how things that start small can become something beautiful with time and care. 6 months after the trial, Hale Technologies announced a major pivot toward humanitarian technology projects. They partnered with the United Nations on climate monitoring systems. They developed free educational software for underfunded schools. They created medical diagnostic tools for areas without access to advanced healthcare. The company that Richard had built for profit and ego became something that actually helped people. The Voss Trust funded it all, and Sarah Mitchell ran it with competence and compassion. Elena served on the board, but spent most of her time with the twins and with Katerina, learning about her grandfather's networks, understanding the infrastructure he'd built to fight oppression and support freedom. She took those lessons and applied them carefully, funding dissidents here, supporting independent journalism there, using her resources to make the world slightly better in small, invisible ways. On the twins' 3rd birthday, Elena threw them a party in the garden. Just family and close friends, nothing fancy. Mason wore a superhero cape. Sophia wore a princess dress and refused to take it off even when it got covered in cake. Sarah came with her husband. James came with his family. Katerina came alone but brought gifts that made the twins squeal with delight. As the sun set and the children played, Katerina stood beside Elena watching them. You've done well, Katerina said. Building something real from the ashes of what Richard destroyed. I had good teachers. Your grandfather would be very proud of the woman you've become, and I think he'd be especially proud that you chose happiness over revenge. Elena smiled. Revenge would have been easier. Happiness required work. The best things always do. That night, after the guests had gone and the twins were asleep, Elena walked through her quiet house. She stopped in the study looking at her grandfather's photograph. I think I understand now, she said to the image. What you were trying to teach me. Power isn't about control. It's about choice. The choice to protect what matters. The choice to build instead of destroy. The choice to use what you have for something bigger than yourself. She touched the frame gently. Thank you for trusting me with your legacy. I'll do my best to honor it. She turned off the light and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow she'd wake up early with the twins. They'd make breakfast together. They'd play. They'd learn. They'd grow. And Elena would continue the work her grandfather started, not because she had to, but because she'd chosen to. Not because she was Victor Voss's granddaughter, but because she was Elena Voss, a woman who'd found her own strength by facing the worst and refusing to be broken by it. The poor waitress had never existed. The discarded wife had been an illusion. The woman who remained was someone far more dangerous and far more compassionate than anyone had given her credit for. She was a mother first, a guardian of legacy second. A woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies, it's building something they can never touch. Richard would spend the rest of his life in prison. Lauren had disappeared into obscurity, her plea deal requiring her silence. Sokolov was serving consecutive life sentences in 3 different countries. And Elena? Elena was home with her children sleeping safely down the hall, with a purpose that gave her life meaning, with power she'd finally learned to wield without apology. She'd won, not because she'd been ruthless, though she had been when necessary. She'd won because she'd never forgotten what she was fighting for. The twins. Always the twins. Everything else was just details. Elena fell asleep that night with a smile on her face, dreaming not of courtrooms or corporate wars, but of a garden where 2 children played in the sunshine, safe and loved, and blissfully unaware of how hard their mother had fought to give them that peace. And in the morning, when they climbed into her bed demanding pancakes and stories and all the beautiful chaos of being 3 years old, she gave them everything she had. Because that's what love looked like when you stopped pretending to be someone you weren't. That's what power looked like when you used it for the right reasons. That's what victory looked like when you measured it not in dollars or headlines, but in the laughter of children who would grow up knowing their mother had fought for them and won. The story that had started with a woman alone in a courtroom ended with a family in a garden, building a life worth living. And that, Elena thought, as she watched her children plant more seeds in the dirt, was the only ending that ever really mattered.